Volume 7 of DanMachi, the light novel series, follows very closely after Volume 6, with the incident, of course, with the war games, Belle being pushed into that by, of course, a lovely shady fella, and then him losing that bet, and then Hestia decides to take everything from him, including the money, the house, disowning him and kicking him out. But the main thing, of course, is Hestia getting the money and the house itself, and then she decides to re-renovate the house, get everything into order, and of course this small lovely group of familiars end up deciding to live in this lovely big spacious house. And you can definitely see it's very spacious. Belle doesn't know what to do with himself. He wants more members to join the familiar, so they try to go on a recruiting spree, but that doesn't turn out well when people find out that Hestia is majorly in debt, of course, because of the dagger that she bought from Hephaestus in the first season and much earlier on in the light novels, where she bought the dagger for Belle to help him on his adventure, because of course he was always going up against more and more and more dangerous things, and she just wanted to protect him the best that she could. And so that debt ends up coming back to sort of bite her on the tush. Of course, Belle isn't particularly happy. He's very much deep in shock. He's quite distressed by it. He wants to go out into the dungeon to farm money, but of course Hestia is very adamant that this is her debt and that she will pay it off. But of course the other members of the familiar want to contribute in some way, shape or form. But of course, following those events, one of the members of the actual familiar itself gets some interesting news from the other members that she used to be part of, her neutral acquaintances that she still works with, is still very close with, of course, because of their bonds together. She gets some interesting news which sort of rattles her. She gets very jittery, a little bit shy. She just is very withdrawn with the news that she finds out, which ends up leading to her jumping out of the house late at night and ended up trying to sort of sneak over to the pleasure palace, where of course Belle and the gang end up deciding to follow her to find out what is going on, which just leads to Belle getting split up, bumping into Hermes, a lovely boy himself, always up to no good. And I think he's always just one of those moments where he's always just one of those characters that adds fun moments to the anime itself and the light novel and just spices things up and always puts a smile on my face. Just knowing what he's up to and trying to sift through what is in his mindset of why he's doing certain things, what his overall objective is. He does sort of relinquish what his plans were at the end of the light novel itself, but as he states in the light novel and in the anime, it didn't quite turn out the way he expected. All three party members that kind of come together to sort of play out this event definitely took things in a different spin, and some took things a little bit too far and of course allowed their own jealousy to get ahead of them. And that is of course to do with Ishtar and Freya and their confrontation that ends up being the big momentum at the end of this volume. But of course Belle gets into the pleasure district, he ends up getting lost, he bumps into Hermes, then he of course bumps into some Amazon girls which decide to take it upon themselves to sort of bring him back to the fun house, and he tries to escape. But of course he bumps into Ishtar. Ishtar doesn't care at the start, but then of course he escapes and they try to chase him, try to stop him from leaving, which of course where he meets a lovely foxy girl, which she's just a sweet and innocent character. I absolutely love sort of the backstory that goes into her as well. The anime itself doesn't dive too deep into the backstory at the start. It does go into the backstory a bit later on, but I feel like the light novel does a better job at going over each major step of her backstory and how she got to the situation she's in exactly the right details, while the anime kind of goes over some of the major highlights but not the intricate, more finer details of every process. So if you do want to know more of the backstory, definitely read the light novels for those anime fans. But still, nonetheless, it doesn't detach away from the anime itself. The anime is still a really good season so far, and it definitely goes into the backstory but nowhere near to the same detail. But of course, Belle bumps into her, they end up discussing about heroes, just some of the things that are on their mind, and they become close friends, and then she ends up helping him escape from the pleasure district, which then leads him to coming home to Hestia being extremely mad. And I'll say this is the one thing that annoyed me about the anime and the light novel, is the way they kind of throw Belle under the bus, because Belle was going off to investigate, and at the start of it, Belle even says that he's not comfortable doing this, he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't want to go out there and follow, he doesn't want to go into the pleasure district. He states many times he's not comfortable and he doesn't want to be out there, and yet he gets the brunt of the punishment and punished at all, when you can see that, again, he wasn't really at fault. Yes, he ended up getting lost out there, but one, getting lost wasn't his fault, and two, going out there wasn't his fault either, because he was just worried about another member of his familia. So I feel like Hestia punishing him is just more her being overly exaggerating the situations because she's trying to be overly protective, and I think there was probably better ways of her going about it. But apparently in the light novel it really shows, not so much in the anime, that a lot of people have an issue with the Pleasure Palace. And there was one scene that was missing out of the anime itself, which was the bar scene. It is in it to a degree, which is mainly where Hermes is in it. Of course, Hermes wanted to contact Freya, but there's a major scene where Belle goes to the bar, he meets the other barmaids, and they are extremely disgusted by the smell that comes off Belle itself. And then of course Belle goes to the actual guild building, and that scene does happen in the anime, but the bar scene gets cut out, much like the backstory, much like Hermes having the box with him with the killing stone. That doesn't get introduced until later on when actually Hermes mentions it. There's little things that are just not there, but it doesn't make a big difference. It more just helps with flow. But very quickly after the bar scene and of course the guild building scene, we go into sort of more of Belle's punishment itself. Belle is going out, sort of doing community service, he's helping people out, trying to fix things. Of course, that's where he went to the bar and fixed the roof itself, but then they end up going to the library where they're sorting through the library, and they're discussing things, and Belle mentions about a girl that he met in the Pleasure Palace. That, of course, is an acquaintance, and the reason why this other familiar member went out there looking for something, which, of course, she didn't end up finding, but Belle was the one that ended up bumping into her, which leads to this big discussion in the library itself. And then after that, Belle ends up reading a book about heroes, which kind of brings a lot of memories of when he met her in the Pleasure District. The actual library scene itself does not happen, except for the book scene. So there's two major library scenes. There's of course the discussion with the other familiar members. Instead of having it in the library, they have it outside while they're doing stuff, and then Belle goes to the library and reads the book. And I think this was just mainly due to pace, so the anime could go faster through the story and not go through the slow components. It was one criticism I saw quite a lot online, was that people were saying that Season 2 was very slow paced, but the fact is that I find that Season 2 follows the light novels a lot more closely. Compared to Season 1, it jumped through major scenes very quickly and jumped over complete chapters just to get to the next major action scene. And I kind of like Season 2 for the fact that it goes over some of the intricate details, even though yes, it doesn't have all of it, but I still feel it does a better job of in comparison to Season 1. I still enjoy Season 1, I still enjoy Season 2, I'm just putting a note of the differences between the amount of detail they take from the light novels itself. Both are still really good products, but I do feel like Season 1 was a little bit too fast paced, which they could have slowed down a little bit, but again, that's just personal opinion. After that though, they end up deciding to discuss about how they're going to get this lovely girl out of the Pleasure District, because of course she's been forced in there, obviously not there of her own free will, when of course you see the backstory and just how she got into this predicament. And so of course they try to come up with a way to get her out, and Hermes contributes to that discussion and ends up saying, hey, if you make all this money, you might be able to get her out. But of course Hermes knows the bigger picture of why she's there, which is when Hermes says, hey, killing stone, and then kind of leaves it at that and ends up leaving very quickly. And so they end up going to the dungeon, trying to make some money. Of course, Belle ends up telling Hestia about the killing stone, but of course no one knows what the deal is about that, except of course the girl that originally went out there looking for her friend. The actual god himself knows what a killing stone is, and that's where they discover what the big end game is. But of course by then it's too late, because of course Belle ends up getting a job to go into the dungeon to make some money, which is another minor detail that is not actually in the anime, is the actual mission itself. They got a request mission sent by a trading company to say, hey, we want you to find these items, go down into the dungeon, go find them, and we'll pay a lucrative amount of course money. And they say, absolutely, this is, you know, too good to be true. The actual going down there is part of course the anime, but the request itself is in nowhere in the actual anime itself to that detail, and it's just very much brushed over and just said, hey, we're going to the dungeon, let's make some money. and then from there very quickly does things escalate very badly, because of course now Ishtar knows the value of Bel and decides to go on a full crusade to try and get Bel under wraps, capture him, and try and turn him into one of her familiars and basically make him a lapdog of Ishtar, to shove it to, of course, Freya, which would provoke Freya and make her angry, and this was Ishtar's entire game, to try and take stuff that Freya wanted. And so you can see this massive rivalry between Freya and Ishtar, and I think it's a really fun rivalry because, again, it adds a bit of chemistry between these gods and goddesses of who likes who doesn't like who, rather than them just all getting along and having their own districts and them all just trying to race to the bottom floor of the dungeon. There are outside components that contribute into why there are sort of different turfs, different areas, and of course Ishtar and Freya are both seen as those absolute beautiful goddesses. Of course, they have different ways of acquiring their familiars and how they capture them or how they persuade them to join, depending on which one. I see Ishtar being more of forcing than actually sort of persuading, while Freya is a lot more, she just persuades them and sort of hypnotizes them under her spell. And that's why I've always enjoyed Freya. She's just very crazy, unpredictable, and just a fun character, while Ishtar is a very fun character for this arc in particular, and of course she is in the side story as well. But of course the dungeon scene happens, Bel gets captured along with one other familiar member, and the others just end up getting left there to run back to Hestia to sort of report what's going on, which leads to them going to the actual pleasure district itself and basically getting blocked right at the door for quite a long time. But Bel gets captured, and of course I would say a less than fun character ends up sort of breaking the rules of what Ishtar wants and ends up locking him up in a separate dungeon. He ends up trying to escape, he fails at it, but of course our lovely fox girl, which of course seems to have a little bit of a crush on Bel because of how heroic he's always tried to be, the stories and all of that kind of stuff, has persuaded her to free him so that he can run away. But of course he wants to save her, but it gets to a point where he's trying to run away that he ends up sort of taking the first step in a negative direction, where he knows that he can't do anything unless there's repercussions to it, because again he wants to save her, but he knows that there's going to be repercussions. He can't just run in, save her, and that's the end of it. There's no backlash to it. He knows there has to be a repercussion, and it's going to end up weighing down on Hestia and her familiar, so he ends up going, no, I'm not going to do anything. But then as he's walking away, he decides, you know what, I'm going to do this. I need to be a hero, I need to do the right thing, and I need to protect her from these horrible people, which leads him into changing his mind and going out and trying to save her and destroying the Killing Stone, which leads into a massive fight itself, not just from Bel and of course his companion that he brought along that was also captured, but of course Freya ends up finding out through spies and little webs in there that of course Bel got captured, and she is not impressed. Now in the actual anime itself, they do skip over, I would say, two things. One, Bel's dagger getting confiscated. Of course, another familiar uses a certain skill to find the dagger itself, which she thought was Bel, because the dagger itself has its sort of own identity because it's linked to Bel. That gets brushed over in the anime and miraculously has it. That's what I mean by he just somehow gets handed it and he's got the dagger back, even though in the earlier stages it's confiscated. I feel like that could have been added in the actual anime itself. I'm a little bit confused why they scrapped that, when it kind of gives a bit of detail to just the importance and the connection that the actual dagger has to Bel. I feel like that, of all things, should have been in there. But overall, most other scenes are kind of just shuffled around when it comes to Freya attacking Ishtar itself, because Freya attacks very much earlier on in the light novels, but in the anime she attacks much more later on in the story. And I think that's just purely for flow. I don't have an issue with that. I just wanted to note it though, for those that want to know the difference between the anime and the light novel. That is a notable thing. And there's definitely a lot more fight scenes going on in the light novel itself, but I don't necessarily have a problem with that either. It's just flow itself. But of course, Bel goes in there, he tries to save her, he ends up destroying the actual Killing Stone itself. Freya's attacking from another direction, she's pushing her troops forward because of course they're in surprise, and that's where Ishtar learns that things are not going as the way she planned, which ends up leading to of course Ishtar getting sent back to heaven, because of course Freya and Ishtar have a lovely conversation up in the tower, and it doesn't go the way Ishtar wants. She falls off the tower, falls to her demise, and ends up getting sent back to the heavens. Of course, none of them can actually die. They just end up sort of playing the game, and if they end up using their godly powers, or of course die, they end up going back to heaven, where they now watch the rest play the game as it's intended. So of course that doesn't turn out the way Ishtar had planned, and you can definitely see the fear in Ishtar and her trying to use every underhanded tactic to try and get above Freya, but Freya just is one step ahead. She's very conniving, very smart. And I will say the one thing that I'm happy about from the light novel being in the anime is of course the I love you scene, which is in the anime, but not to the same degree. I do like how they've done it so it's more mysterious, but at the end of the massive fight scene in the latest episode of course, DanMachi, when Ishtar falls out of the tower, Freya is just standing there staring at Belle while he's saving, of course, our lovely fox girl, and he's just standing there staring at the tower because, of course, the light itself happens because of Ishtar, and he sees Freya standing there, and she just says, I love you. In the light novel, you know distinctively what she says, but in the anime, she just says it, but you don't hear it, it's just lip reading. And that, I think, is just a nice touch, because again, that's from Belle's perspective, that's what he's seen her say that. Of course, we the readers, again, it's a completely different experience. So I do like that little touch, I think it's just a nice little perspective for Belle. But overall, I absolutely love this volume. It's by far one of my favourite volumes so far. It's a much more bigger volume, and it again goes very far out of the dungeon itself. Of course, it goes into the dungeon for a little bit, but personally myself, I just like the change of pace itself, and I really enjoyed the new characters that got introduced. And of course, our lovely fox girl ends up deciding to join Hestia's familiar and ends up working alongside Belle. Of course, the other Amazons ends up either going their own directions or joining other familiars. Of course, Hestia wouldn't have a bar of it of having any of them. Of course, in the familiar itself, I'm sure Belle would have had much fun with some of those Amazon girls, but sadly, he did not get his entire wish, but at least he gets a lovely fox girl that we must protect and absolutely cherish to the ends of the earth. But overall, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are your favourite parts in this volume? What are your thoughts about the anime and the light novel? And just your overall thoughts and opinions are definitely welcome in the comment section down below. But if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I'll see you, beautiful nerds, in the next video.